Good evening. I came into church this morning and saw this kind of relax and this starfish and this hammock and a palm tree, and I think that looks like a cocktail of some sort, isn't it? But anyway, I saw this sitting out and I thought, wow, who's going to the ocean? And then I realized I was. So this is part of my nice farewell. My niece, Emma, lives in, and I did a sermon about Emma. Remember Emma's question? My niece lives in Hawaii. She's a swim coach and a marine biologist looking for work. She's coaching children now and looking for work as a marine biologist, but she's lived in Hawaii ever since she went to college there. So almost about 12 years. So they're getting married there. And I thought, well, how sad to have to go to officiate at a wedding where I was going to get in the ocean. So how lovely. Pity, I know. I'm excited. I think that the water in the Pacific at this time of year is going to be frigid. But I'm going to give it a try. Did they swim? Yes? It was nice? All right. Well, that's one of the reasons that I'm taking off a little earlier than I planned, because of Emma's wedding. So last week we started this series about families and how families relate, and how when we learn how families relate, then that's sort of the skills we use when we relate at work, when we relate with our friends, and so forth. So I'm telling a series of fables from a famed counselor and picking up Bible stories that reflect the same kind of lesson. So tonight I'm going to read a funny story. I think it's a funny story from the Old Testament, Lessons from a Donkey. And so the reading is from the book of Numbers. I don't know how many of you spend a lot of time in Numbers, but it's early on, and this is about a man named Balaam, the donkey, and the angel. So I'm going to start on verse 21. So Balaam got up in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the officials of Moab. God's anger kindled because he was going, and the angel of the Lord took his stand in the road as his adversary. Now he was riding on the donkey, and his two servants were with him. The donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand. So the donkey turned off the road and went into the field. And Balaam struck the donkey to turn back onto the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path between the vineyards with a wall on each side. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it scraped against the wall and scraped Balaam's foot against the wall. So he struck it again. Then the angel of the Lord went ahead and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn either to the right or to the left. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it lay down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled, and he struck the donkey with his staff. Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and it said to Balaam, "What have I done to you, that you have struck me these 3 times?" Balaam said to the donkey, "Because you have made a fool of me. I wish I had a sword in my hand. I would kill you right now." But the donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your donkey, which you have ridden all your life to this day? Have I been in the habit of treating you this way?" And Balaam said, "No." Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road, and his drawn sword in his hand, and he bowed down, falling on his face. The angel of the Lord said to him, "Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? I have come out as an adversary, because your way is perverse before me. The donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times. If it had not turned away from me, surely just now I would have killed you and let it live. The story of Balaam's donkey. Well, this series, Hope Changes Everything, is all about families, family systems. And the stories that we heard last week, this week, and next week are from the work of Edwin Friedman. He's a deceased rabbi and counselor. Some of these stories are shocking. Some of the stories are funny, but he tells a series of fables that highlights the struggles we have in our relationships, our marriages, our families, our workplaces, and our friendships. So, we begin with one of Friedman's fables. We begin with a story. When little John was about a year old, his parents noticed thin fibers protruding through his pores. The condition alarmed his parents, so they took little John to the doctor. The physician announced that John was unique in medical history. His ganglia, or nerves, were growing outside of his skin. Since little John was otherwise in excellent health, it was decided that nothing would be done except to observe him. The doctors told the parents that they must be super sensitive to his every move. You see, when your nerves grow outside of your body, you can get hurt very easily. His parents readily agreed to treat him with special care. Well, as little John grew up, so did his nerves, until they simply just trailed after him as he walked. While it was not a very pretty sight, surprisingly, it turned out to have some advantages. He learned from the very beginning that he could always count on someone else to watch out for him. He found that he could plow a path through any group of friends by just walking toward them. People would retreat at his advance for fear of, quote, stepping on his feelings. Now, all of this is not to say that people never felt resentment towards little John, but they never spoke it aloud. All managed to quiet their resentment with reproaches for how unsensitive they were. And so it went. Little John graduated high school and he got a job, and one day he met a woman that he liked. Being extremely shy, she was thrilled at the advances of this very attentive, if somewhat strange, creature. She treated him with the utmost care, and soon her pity turned to love. Everywhere they went, she watched out for him. In time, the guiding principle of her life became, how can I help this man avoid pain? And after they had been married for a while, though, she began to tire. Still she tried, for this poor man could not help himself. But it became increasingly difficult for her to constantly attend to his needs. She decided to confess her increasing insensitivity to her family, to her doctor, to her minister. She even sought professional help. And all sympathized, but could offer little advice. So they urged her just to be more patient. She tried, but soon her health began to suffer. She got headaches and she couldn't sleep. She felt anxious most of the time, but she dared not tell John, of course, for fear of hurting him. So what should John's wife do? What would you tell her? Well, in every family and in every organization, stress gathers around the insensitivities of the sensitive, or as I've heard it described, the tyranny of the touchy. There is a person or persons around whom everyone tiptoes in an effort to avoid conflict. The result of that, like John, is that the whole system, the whole family adapts itself around the sensitive one. Boy, if I all of a sudden go up in lightning, y'all just get the extinguisher. I'm trying to think. I feel like I'm bringing in. Okay. Well, okay. So the whole system adapts itself. Well, the balancing act looks something like this. We have to avoid making mom or dad mad. Or we cannot ask Steve to do that job at work because he'll blow up. Or we don't say much at the meeting because we don't want to risk offending anybody. So why does this happen, and what can we do about it? In any system of human relationships, no matter who it is, there is a lot of anxiety that kind of finds its way to the surface, often in anger, like Balaam in this Bible reading. Balaam is a fortune teller for hire. He tells the future, and people pay him for it. Okay, good, that's helpful. Well, the king of Moab, who is the enemy to the people of God, to the Israelites, sends for Balaam, promising to pay him well if he curses God's people, if he curses the Israelites. And so God doesn't want this to happen, and so God tells Balaam not to go. And again, the king of Balaam sends messengers to tempt Balaam. And this time, God grows angry at Balaam's greed. And so God surprises him as he travels with this angel in the road. And knowing of God's displeasure, Balaam is anxious about his choices. He's nervous, he's anxious. And so when that donkey veers off the road the first time, Balaam beats her. She's making him look bad. Balaam is so anxious that when the donkey speaks to him, he doesn't even say, "Wait a minute, my donkey is speaking to me." Doesn't even seem to notice. Instead, he blames the animal for his trouble. "You made a fool of me. If I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now." But Balaam's anxiety isn't about the donkey. It's about him and the fact that he knows he's in the wrong, and he knows that God is angry at his choices. The sensitive ones, the touchy ones, the anxious ones among us often beat up others and get their way simply because they don't know how to manage their own anxiety. Like John, they expect someone else to take care of them, someone else to manage their anxiety and make everything better. Now think about a mother-in-law. Anybody have a mother-in-law? There may be a few in the room. Think about a mother-in-law who shows up with her husband. Carol, the dessert was delicious. Think about a mother-in-law who shows up with her husband at the home of their son and his wife. And from the time she arrives until she leaves, she insults her daughter-in-law. The sheets are scratchy. The towels are thin. The meals are bad. Well, the daughter-in-law reacts by being stressed out and weeping. And her husband and his father react as always by not seeking to tick mom off any further. Everyone in the family gets mom's anxiety. Visits are Maylocks moments. Now, does this sound familiar to anyone? I'm not talking to you, Carol. Anxiety begets reactivity, which causes more anxiety. And the whole place just sort of rises with this kind of tension. See, in everybody's family. When someone attacks us verbally, we naturally react, whether it's by arguing back or by simply knuckling under. When we react, we take on the pain of the other person and become more anxious ourselves. We take on the anxiety, yes. That's called fight or flight. Hang on a sec. This happens because we immediately go to the most primitive part of our brain. Our brain is designed in 3 different parts. The first one, the primitive or the reptilian part, is back here. Yeah, the brain, they call it the lizard brain. Oh, okay. Now that may help. The middle part where our emotions are right here. And then the top part of our brain, the cortex, is where we actually do our thinking. This is the part that does our rational thinking. So when we are confronted with anxiety, we tend to react with this reptilian part. Fight, fight or flight. Fight or run away. And that's that lizard back here. We want to either eliminate the problem or run away. But the reality is, when we try to deal with the anxiety of someone else, the more miserable we become. It is just on top. So how do we break this cycle? How do we deal with the insensitivities of the sensitive? First, we have to remember from last week that the only person whom we have control over is ourselves. We're the only persons we can control. I am responsible for my anxiety. I am responsible for my reaction to someone else's anxiety or someone else's anger. I'm responsible. And here's where our brain can help us to be responsible. We don't have to always react like lizards. We don't always have to react like this lizard brain by this fight or flight. We can actually take a few breaths and move our thinking up to the top of our brain so that we can and must choose the reactions that we have to the people around us who are punching our buttons. This is good. We need to push that lizard back down where it belongs. I can choose not to take on the anxiety of another person. I can move up here into this part of my brain and actually make a choice that keeps me calm. And in so doing, I remain calm and non-anxious. Now, a non-anxious, self-differentiated person doesn't get trapped into this, trapped by the touchy and the sensitive people. If someone bursts into your house or to your office and yells at you for some minor infraction, or a parent terrorizes everyone in the house with their anger, you have to realize for the most part it's not about you. It's their anxiety. And you can choose to make it your own, you can suck it up, or you can choose to give it back to them. You know, but even in this story, donkeys do this. Notice the donkey's reaction to Balaam's fury. I mean, this is one healthy, self-differentiated donkey. I mean, really. Rather than bucking Balaam off, which the donkey could have done, or running for her life, she turns and she says, "Am I not your very own donkey? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you?" And Balaam can only say, "No." Well, the donkey knows it's not about her. She knows it's about Balaam and the fact that he's serving against God. So she refuses to bow to Balaam's anxiety, and she takes a stand in a calm and non-anxious way, which begs the question, who is the real donkey in this story? And it's not the donkey. So go back to the mother-in-law situation. What if the daughter-in-law, anticipating what will happen, knowing that there's going to be a visit and the daughter-in-law will know what's going to happen, and she thinks about her own anxiety, and instead she just decides to make other choices. She decides to be non-anxious. She decides not to let her mother-in-law do railroad tracks right up her. She's going to be non-anxious. So when the mother-in-law starts in on her, she turns and says, "Wow, Mom, I see that you're upset, but I don't believe I've done anything wrong. If you don't like the way my house is run, you're free to leave. I won't be offended. The choice is yours. I, however, choose not to be treated this way." This is so hard. When our anxiety just gets caught up in other anxiety, we just can hardly imagine doing that, staying calm and saying something that directly. But we can learn to do this differently. We can learn to think differently. We can learn that there are other alternatives. So back to our story about little John and his wife. So one day, John's wife is walking home from the therapist. She's going to counseling over all this. She came upon a mother cat and her newborn kittens. As they scrambled over one another in their thirst, the mother carefully guided each one of them to its turn. Then John's wife noticed that one of the kittens had been born lame. Its leg was not fully formed. Strangely, it was the most aggressive of all the kittens. While the other kittens who had eaten were satisfied and fell asleep, this one kept coming back for more, trying to push its way in and to get more than its share. And each time, however, that mother cat pushed it away first very gently, and then with ever harder and increasing whacks. Well, John's wife watched this poor little kitten and the inhumane mother. But when she got home, upon finding her husband reading in a room, she planted herself right in the doorway. And a little later, John, deciding that he wanted to go into another room of the house, marched straight for the doorway that framed his wife. She did not budge. The closer he came, never thinking to ask her to move. After all, he had never had to ask anyone to get out of his way ever before. Suddenly he stopped, confused. What should he do? So first he assumed his most wounded look. And then he tried one that was more winsome and boyish. But his wife, she was like a rock. In desperation, he finally spoke up. "Move! You know I can't squeeze by." She did nothing. "What is the matter with you?" he yelled. And then she began to move, not to one side, not to the other side, but rather directly toward him. Well, he retreated, and she continued on, and he backed up even further, and still she came on, and soon he was cornered. "Have you lost your mind?" he said. He was incredulous, which means that he found it hard to believe what his wife was doing. "Careful there, you almost hurt me," he said. Well, that did it. She raised a foot and with a stomp came down hard on one of those little long trailing nerves. He screeched, more in shock than in pain. And then she stomped, and again, and again. And he ran past her, but she pursued. And she chased him from room to room to room, up the stairs and down the stairs, until they both fell into bed, exhausted. Well, when John's wife woke up the next morning, her headache was completely gone, and she felt great. And for the first time in a very long time, she was without pain and felt relaxed. But more astonishing still was what she saw beside her. For when she looked over at John, she found that his nerves, his ganglia, had disappeared completely. He looked like a normal man. In fact, they had completely recoiled inside his skin. Anxiety will always reign until we choose to move toward it and choose to be healthy. Now, that isn't always easy to do. Nobody likes tension. Nobody likes anxiety. Nobody likes the yelling. It's just nobody likes it. But when we realize that we can choose to take on the anxiety, when we learn that we can allow other people to manage their own pain without taking it on, we begin to see the change in ourselves and in our relationships. Whoa, hello, B. I've spent a lot of time in my life praying that God will take away my anxiety or take away the hostility of the person with whom I am dealing. Oh, I can't tell you how many hours I've prayed for that. But you know, I believe now that God deals with our anxiety by giving it back to us and inviting us to just move toward it, just to embrace it and move toward it. God loves us by not bailing us out, but by giving us responsibility for our own lives. So rather than praying for God to change someone else and make someone else different, I now have learned to pray this way. I've learned to ask, God, show me what's going on inside of me that makes me want to react in such an anxious way. Give me the courage to manage myself. Let me use my head wisely. Get it out? Let me use it wisely and calm me down. Amen. So think about your own relationships, about the anxiety that you feel when a certain person walks into the room, or the stress that you take on because of the touchiness in your family or in the place you work. What would happen if you moved toward it instead of running away? What would happen if you decided today to just give that anxiety back? What would happen if you said calmly to the person who's giving you grief, "Oh, my friend, I see that you're upset. I wonder what you're going to do about that." Give it right back. So this week, I want to invite you to use your brains a little differently as you deal with people. Not to be reactive, but to be calm, to be non-anxious. After all, if a donkey can do it, so can you. Amen. Mary, will you come lead us?